Good afternoon, Excellencies, honored guests, and esteemed colleagues. Welcome to the 39th Annual Meeting of the Academic Council on the United Nations System. My name is Sandra Tombe, and I am the Executive Director of ACUNS, the Academic Council on the United Nations System. And while I'm new in this role, I am not new to the Council. I've been an active member and a participant in the past, so it's really wonderful to get to see very familiar faces and to get to meet new ones, so welcome. This year, the focus of the annual meeting cuts directly to the heart of global governance and a vital theme: multilateralism under challenge and the future of the Pact. I hope you had exciting and engaging sessions this morning and afternoon unpacking this theme through your research and through your practice, and thinking of new ways to help us address some of these challenges and the common issues that bring us back to ACUNS and to the work and the study of the United Nations system and multilateralism more broadly. I am very much excited for this annual meeting and to be in Lisbon for the first time for myself. And with those remarks, I am excited to welcome our president, Dr. Courtney Smith, to offer his welcome remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Like Sandra, I'm very happy to welcome you all to our annual meeting here in Lisbon, Portugal. Everyone in this room knows that this is a time of stress for the United Nations, other international institutions, and quite frankly, global cooperation in general. I could spend time talking about those things, but I do not want to begin our meeting on that kind of tone. I would much prefer to be optimistic. So the environment we're in now is much different than the last time our annual meeting was held in Lisbon, Portugal, which was 2002. That was a period where there was some sense of excitement about multilateralism. As some of you will recall, that was after the United Nations supported the US response to the 9/11 attacks, but before the US invaded Iraq without Security Council authorization. So there was some sense of optimism then. Multilateralism has certainly evolved since 2002, but then so has ACUNS. As I recall, and some of you were also here in 2002 like me, I recall that conference bringing about 120 to 150 of us together. This time we have 450 or more when you count those online. So while multilateralism is under threat, we are blessed with a robust group of kindred spirits that are seeking new and improved avenues for cooperation and ways that we can solve our most pressing problems. And critically, this meeting brings together the perspectives of scholars and practitioners, which has always been in the DNA of ACUNS and one of the things that I know I have always found most valuable. I would like to, first off, extend our deepest appreciation and gratitude to our exceptional hosts here in Lisbon and at Nova University. They've provided us with the space, both literally and figuratively, to have the important conversations that we need to have in the coming days. You're going to have to clap again because now I'm going to thank specific people at Nova University. First off, I'd like to thank the rector, Paulo Pereira, for his support of our conference. And then we have three key members of the community here at Nova that have welcomed us and done the day-to-day work of building our conference. Professor Julia Seixas, right here. Sorry. I apologize for clapping into the mic. Professor Ana Santos Pinto. Professor Philip Duarte. And Ms. Sarah Richarte. So an undertaking of this magnitude also requires the support of sponsors who provide the resources for technology, food, and even more importantly, given the heat of this week, water. So we're deeply appreciative of the President of the Republic of Portugal, in particularly the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and their representative here with us today. So thank you very much. I should also recognize the Portuguese mission to the United Nations. They have been particularly supportive of ACUNS over the years, in particular our fund that supports scholars from the Global South. And just to give you another example of how ACUNS is a changing organization, when we were supporting from the scholars from the Global South just a few years ago in Geneva, we were helping 25 people. This year we had over 100 applications for that support. So quite a growing organization. I would also like to recognize the Recovery and Resilience Plan for the Republic of Portugal, the Nova Tourism and Hospitality Group, the Tourism of Portugal Group, the Portuguese Center for Foundations, the Stimson Center, Georgetown University, the Global Governance Innovation Network, Seton Hall University, the Center for Excellence, Delta, and So Great. So thanks to all our sponsors for making this possible. There are other key people that helped make this conference possible that we're going to recognize on a more personal way during the closing ceremony. But I wanted to express our appreciation at the outset for the efforts that all of them had to put forth to bring us together for a successful conference. Most importantly, I'd like to recognize all of the members of the 2026 Annual Meeting Planning Committee. I'd like to recognize the ACUNS staff under the leadership of Sandra. I'd like to recognize all of our student volunteers. And finally, I'd like to recognize each of you. There are other places, most likely cooler places, that you could be spending your summer, and instead you're here with us wanting to talk about multilateralism and international cooperation. So for the last part of my welcome, I want to share an invitation to all of us. I want to hope that we make the most of these. Some of us are new, some of us have been coming for a while. The reason we choose to attend a conference like this is so that we find it as a professionally rewarding experience. So definitely please attend the sessions. We've already had 2 breakout sessions. I went to 2 different panels and the rooms were full. The questions were lively. The speakers were energetic. I think we're off to a great start. And the fact that we had to add 2 sessions before the welcoming program to accommodate all of you who wanted to participate in this panel is truly remarkable. So congratulations to all of you. But please also be mindful that this is an opportunity for you to network. We are at the same time like-minded people because we desire global solutions to problems, but at the same time we also have very diverse perspectives on how to generate these solutions. So I see this as a moment for listening, learning, reflection, exploration, and hopefully collaboration. So many of you in this room are aware of the career and contributions of a man named Jan Eliasson. Among other roles, he was the Perm Rep of Sweden to the UN, he was president of the 60th session of the General Assembly, but he was also the Deputy Secretary General under Ban Ki-moon. And I was interviewing him nearly 15 years ago when he said something that has stuck to me ever since, so much so that I put it in my welcome remarks in the program, but I'm going to repeat it anyway. He told me, nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. And I think when we look at the scope of the challenges facing multilateralism right now, I encourage each of us to think about what that something is that you're working on, that you want to share with us, so that we can hopefully provide you advice and guidance to make that something even better in the years to come. So, one final invitation. The fact that Sandra introduced us as our 39th annual meeting means that ACUNS is on the verge of its 40th anniversary in the coming year. On behalf of the Board of Directors, I invite each of you to think about interesting and innovative ways in which we could celebrate this occasion in the year to come. We look forward to your ideas and suggestions, whether that be during the breakout, coffee breaks and so forth here, the receptions, or just via email at any point. Thank you all, and best wishes for a successful and rewarding annual meeting.
Thank you, Courtney, for those remarks. I'm originally from South Sudan, so you will not hear me complain about the heat. I think it's wonderful. So for the rest of you, just drink more water, all right? Keep hydrated. Speaking of wonderful hosts, I would like to invite Julia Seixas to offer her welcoming remarks to us. Thank you, Julia.
Good afternoon, dear President of ACUNS, Courtney Smith, dear Executive Director Sandra Tombe, a friend right now, dear members of the ACUNS community, colleagues and friends. For me, it is a real pleasure to welcome you in this meeting of the ACUNS that we host in Nova University. As a co-chair, I am very honored to join you in opening our discussions and conversations and recognize the importance of the work that brings us together today. Indeed, the issues before the United Nations systems today are complex and urgent. There are a list of them, just examples from peace and security, climate change and sustainable development, human rights, forced displacement, and many others, global health, the future of international institutions themselves. None of these challenges can be understood from a single perspective, and none can be addressed effectively without dialogue across disciplines, regions, generations, and professional communities. At a time when multilateral cooperation is under pressure and when global challenges are increasingly interconnected, spaces like this are not only useful, they are very, very necessary. So I hope that our conversation these days will be rigorous, science-based, generous, and practical. I am very proud and very happy to have you at Nova University this year, because Nova share a deep commitment to the knowledge in the service of society and recognize that the challenges of our time cannot be addressed without disciplinary and national boundaries alone. In this sense, Nova and ACUNS, I just covered it like that, meet around a common purpose, as I can say, to strengthen the bridge between scholarship and action and to contribute to a more effective, inclusive and sustainable multilateral system. In spite of Courtney to make some thankful, I would like to thank on the first place the permanent mission of Portugal of the United Nations that proposes us almost 1 year ago to host this meeting. And also to acknowledge the confidence of the ACUNS team to work hardly with us and the work of everyone who has contributed to make this meeting possible, the organizers, the speakers, the moderators, participants, and our partners that I will not list again. Meetings like this depend on many forms of work, much of it behind the scenes, and we are very grateful for that commitment. Thank you, everybody, for being here today and for contributing with your time, expertise, and energy. I look forward to our discussions and to the insights that will emerge from them. Last but not the least, please visit our wonderful city of Lisbon, quite hot in these days, above the average. Guess why? But still with much to offer in terms of culture and fun. Thank you very much. Okay, at this moment, it is my great pleasure to invite Professor Paulo Pereira, Rector of Nova University, for his remarks.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So, Your Excellency, Secretary of State of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation, Dora Ana Isabel Xavier, Professor Courtney Smith, President of the Academic Council of the United Nations System and Dean of Seton Hall University. Dr. Sandra Tomb, Executive Director of ACUNS, distinguished ACUNS scholars and researchers, esteemed colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me start by saying that the lights are a bit challenging here. I can't see anything in the audience, and I can hardly see what I'm reading, but I'm sure it will work. So, ladies and gentlemen, after extending my warm welcome to all of you, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Professor Julia Seixas. I think this is only fair, co-chair of the 2026 ACUNS Annual Meeting, whose dedication and leadership have been instrumental in bringing this prestigious conference to Nova University in Lisbon. Through her commitment, together with the invaluable efforts of many colleagues, collaborators, and members both of Nova and ACUNS community, we are honored to host this annual meeting. To everyone, and there are many who contributed to making this possible, please accept our gratitude and our thanks. And before I begin, I would also like to express our sincere appreciation to Mr. Jorge Moreira da Silva for his recorded message and for his commitment, continued commitment to the values that bring us together here. It is my pleasure and indeed honor to welcome you to Nova University of Lisbon for the 2026 annual meeting. We are honored to welcome participants from across the world, from diverse geographies, academic traditions, professional backgrounds, and institutions, brought together in Lisbon to share knowledge and experience that may help us to better understand and collectively respond to the present challenges facing the multilateralism and international cooperation. Allow me to begin by extending a very warm welcome to all of you, to those who have traveled long distances to be with us here in Lisbon, to those who are accompanying us online from across the world, to the wider ACUNS community, and to all of our colleagues whose work bridges research, policy, and practice in the service of global cooperation. Your presence, whether physical or virtual, is a powerful reminder that technology, when placed at the service of knowledge, inclusion, and dialogue, can bring people closer together. It enables wider and more equitable participation, helps overcome barriers of geography and circumstance, and opens conferences such as this one to all of those who wish to contribute and to learn from the debates of genuine global importance. I would also like to express my sincere gratitude to the distinguished members of this opening session for their presence and for their contribution. We are particularly honored by the participation of Ana Isabel Xavier, the Secretary of State of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Portugal, whose presence underlies the importance that Portugal attaches to dialogue, international cooperation, and multilateral engagement. We are equally honored to welcome Mr. Jorge Moreira da Silva, Executive Director of the United Nations Office for Project Services, whose participation brings to this opening session the perspective of the United Nations system and its vital work in translating global commitments into concrete actions on the ground. I also wish to acknowledge the leadership of ACUNS, as well as the co-chairs of this annual meeting, Professor Julia Seixas, Pro-Rector here at Nova for Sustainability, and Richard Ponzio, Senior Fellow and Director at the Stimson Center. To all the keynote speakers, chairs, panelists, and participants who will animate the discussions over the coming days. For Nova University here in Lisbon, it is a privilege to host an academic event of such global significance. ACUNS has long played a unique role in bringing together scholars and practitioners engaged with the United Nations system, global governance, peace, human rights, sustainable development, and international cooperation. Its annual meeting is not merely a conference, it is a space of dialogue, critical reflection, and intellectual responsibility. This year's main topic, multilateralism and their challenges and the future of the Pact, could hardly be more timely. We meet at a moment when the international system is facing profound pressures and tensions. Wars and conflicts, humanitarian crises, forced displacements, inequalities, climate disruption, technological transformations, threats to human rights, and growing skepticism towards multilateral institutions. Universities cannot remain at the margins of these debates. On the contrary, universities have a duty to be active participants in them. Our role is not only to produce knowledge, but also to question assumptions, to connect disciplines, to preserve freedom of thought, and to bring evidence, imagination, and ethical responsibilities to the public life. Thank you. Thank you. At Nova, we understand this responsibility as part of our institutional identity. We aspire to be and to act as a global and civic university. Global because our teaching, research, and partnerships are embedded in international networks of knowledge and cooperation. Civic because we believe that universities must serve societies, promote inclusion, defend human dignity, and contribute to the common good. This commitment is inseparable from sustainability. At Nova, sustainability lies at the very heart of our mission. It is a guiding principle that should guide education, research, innovation, campus life, and community engagement. The Sustainable Development Goals are present across all of our scientific programs. In undergraduate programs, master's and doctoral education, and across the diverse fields of knowledge that make up our university, from social sciences and humanities to health and medical sciences, from law and economics to technology, data, and engineering, from environmental sciences to art, culture, and communication. The alignment of our teaching and research with the Sustainable Development Goals reflects a broader institutional commitment that complex global challenges require interdisciplinary thinking, cooperation across epistemologies, and the ability to listen to different forms of knowledge and experience. No single discipline, no single country, no single institution can respond alone to the challenges before us. We need science, but we also need ethics, we need innovation, but also justice. We need governance, but also trust, and we need evidence, but also dialogue. There are some birds in my pocket. Sorry. Now, this is called Peaceful Morning. I wonder why my phone... Sorry about this. This was not part of the... Let me continue. Apologies for that. This is why hosting the ACUNS Annual Meeting is so important for Nova. It allows us to bring into our university a global conversation that is deeply aligned with our mission, the promotion of knowledge for the benefit of society, the education of students as citizens of the world, the defense of humanitarian cooperation, fundamental freedoms, and human rights, and the pursuit of peace. It also allows us to reaffirm that universities are places where differences can meet freely and respectfully. At a time when public debate is too often polarized, universities must remain spaces of pluralism, critical thinking, and openness. They must enable the encounter between cultures, generations, regions, and disciplines. They must ensure that academic communities are inclusive, equitable, and free. Free to question, free to disagree, free to imagine alternatives, and free to contribute to a better world. This meeting also takes place at a significant moment for Portugal. Only a few weeks ago, Portugal was elected as a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council for 2027-2028. This election is a recognition of Portugal's commitment to dialogue, diplomacy, international law, cooperation, and multilateralism. In that sense, welcoming ACUNS to Lisbon is especially meaningful. The debates that will take place here over the next 3 days resonate with the responsibilities that Portugal will soon assume at the heart of the United Nations system. They also resonate with the responsibilities of universities everywhere to help societies understand complexity, prevent conflicts, foster cooperation, and prepare new generations for global citizenship. Lisbon, too, is an appropriate place for such gatherings. I hope that beyond the sessions of this conference, you will find the time to experience its light, the weather, the temperature, as Julie already mentioned, but also the river, the food, the culture, and the hospitality. Before concluding, and I'm about to conclude, apologies for the long speech, I wish to express my gratitude to all of those who make this meeting possible. In particular, thank you to ACUNS leadership, secretariat, and support team from their trust and collaboration. I also thank the teams here locally and Nova that help, and the Rectorate that helped to make this happen. So my first wish is that this annual meeting will be intellectually demanding, open, generous, and consequential. May it generate new ideas, new partnerships, and new forms of trust. May it remind us that knowledge is a public good and that academic communities have a vital role to play in sustaining hope, reason, and cooperation in difficult times. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rector Pereira. Your phone gave us a foreshadowing of things to come, so just a note to everyone to remember that, the tunes we heard, because it will connect to something we'll experience at a later point during the day. Now I would like to briefly introduce Mr. Jorge Moreira da Silva, who is an Undersecretary General and Executive Director of the United Nations Office for Project Services. Prior to this appointment, Mr. Moreira da Silva was visiting professor at the Faculty of Engineering of the University of Porto, adjunct professor at the Paris School of International Affairs, and chairman of the Lisbon-based think tank Platform for Sustainable Growth. Unfortunately, he's not able to be here in person, but he has recorded a message for us.
Excellencies, colleagues, I want to start by thanking Professor Paulo Pereira, the rector of the Nova University, and Dr. Courtney Smith for their kind invitation to join ACUNS. It's a pleasure to join you today, even if only virtually, taking into consideration other commitments. I want to thank the organizers for bringing together such an outstanding community of leaders, researchers, and practitioners to examine the future of multilateralism. We live in a moment of profound uncertainty. Around the world, conflicts are intensifying, with consequences that extend beyond national borders. A quarter of humanity, 25% of the people in the world, now lives in places affected by conflict. Climate change is accelerating, extreme weather is destroying lives, livelihoods, and infrastructure. And inequalities within and among countries are deepening. Around 700 million people have no access to electricity. 700 million people live in extreme poverty, and half of the population in the world is not fully covered by essential health services. And as we know, humanitarian needs are also rising. It's not just development, it's also humanitarian. Hunger is spreading, and trust in institutions, governments, and increasingly in international cooperation itself is waning. All of this comes as official development assistance, ODA, has dropped almost 25%, which represents the most significant drop of ODA in the history of this critical tool to provide solidarity and collaboration. But this is not a moment for multilateralism to pull back. It is a time to regroup and double down on solidarity and action. No country, however powerful, can address today's interconnected crisis alone. From climate action and energy transition to public health, migration, and sustainable infrastructure, the solutions demand collective action grounded in shared responsibility and solidarity. The question is not whether multilateralism is relevant, it's about whether it is delivering results for people. It must become more effective, inclusive, and fit for today's challenges. That is precisely why the Pact for the Future is so important. It represents a renewed commitment to international cooperation at a time when fragmentation threatens to become the new normal. It recognizes that global institutions must evolve to reflect today's realities while remaining anchored in the principles of the United Nations Charter. But agreements alone are not enough. The true measure of the success of the Pact for the Future, as is the case also for the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement, lies in its implementation. Yes, we need to scale up, finance, and reform the policy landscape, but we need to focus on practical outcomes for people, not just policy and financing. When communities see schools reopen, hospitals functioning, clean energy installed, or critical infrastructure restored, they can see the impact of multilateral cooperation in their daily lives. And this is how we can build trust, through implementation. This is exactly where UNOPS, the organization I have the honor to lead, comes in. UNOPS helps translate UN resolutions and global commitments into practical results on the ground. We partner with UN agencies, with multilateral finance institutions, with governments, with the civil society, with the private sector. We help our partners deliver projects for people across humanitarian, development, peace, and security efforts. Despite the many challenges of our world, there are also reasons for optimism. We are witnessing a remarkable acceleration in green technologies and solutions. The green energy revolution is already here. Last year, for the first time, wind, solar, and other renewables generated more electricity than coal globally. The case for this transition has never been stronger. The renewable energy is the cheapest energy in the world. Given the crisis in the Middle East and the volatility of energy markets, this is even more relevant. The transition must be faster and fairer. We need to invest in its infrastructure, not only on the supply, on renewable energy, but also on grids and storage. Closing the energy gap and expanding clean energy is not only a matter of climate justice, it is also about energy security, economic opportunity, and global stability. And of course, at the time of the AI revolution and profound societal changes and challenges, your work as academics could not be more important. As misinformation spreads rapidly and public debate is increasingly polarized, rigorous research, independent analysis, and informed dialogue are indispensable because it can help also to frame the right regulation, to identify needs and solutions, strengthen accountability, and address governance challenges. Today's challenges are formidable, but they are also present an opportunity to renew our institutions, strengthen international solidarity, and build a multilateral system that is better equipped for the realities of the 21st century. Let's seize that opportunity together. And I'd like again to thank you for this opportunity to address ACUNS in such an important moment for multilateralism.
I now have the honor to invite Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Portugal, Mrs. Ana Isabel Xavier, for her welcome remarks. I can say a little bit more about you, Ana, if you would allow me. Mrs. Xavier holds a PhD in International Relations. She was professor at the Autonomous University of Lisbon, integrated researcher at the Center for International Studies, researcher at Center for Security and Defense Research at the Portuguese Military University Institute. She previously also served as Deputy Director General for National Defense Policy. You're welcome.
Professor Paulo Pereira, Rector of Universidade Nova de Lisboa, Dr. Courtney Smith, President of ACUNS, Professor Júlia Seixas, Pro-Rector of Universidade Nova de Lisboa and Co-Chair of the 2026 ACUNS Annual Meeting, Dr. Richard Ponzio, Co-Chair of the 2026 ACUNS Annual Meeting, and Professor Veselin Popovsky, also Co-Chair, Ambassador Anabel Zacarias, Director of our Diplomatic Institute, esteemed participants and invitees, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor to be here at the opening ceremony of the 39th Annual Meeting of the Academic Council of the United Nations System, hosted by Universidade Nova de Lisboa. Allow me to start by congratulating ACUNS and NOVA for bringing together academics, policymakers, and practitioners to reflect on the future of multilateralism at a time when it is being increasingly tested and questioned. This year, the meeting is dedicated to a most pressing subject, the challenges to multilateralism and the Pact for the future. For Portugal, this discussion comes at a particularly significant moment. Just a few weeks ago, on the 3rd of June, we were elected to the United Nations Security Council as a non-permanent seat for the 2027-2028 mandate. This election is not only an honor, but above all, a responsibility to continue contributing actively to upholding the principles and values of the United Nations Charter and the rules-based international order. And Portugal's commitment to multilateralism is not circumstantial. It is an integral part of our DNA. Throughout its long history, Portugal learned that prosperity and security depends on openness, connection, and cooperation. And Portugal is, by nature and vocation, a bridge-building nation. This approach shapes our engagement with the world by listening, by building partnerships, and by advancing shared priorities. Ladies and gentlemen, many of the challenges before us are cross-cutting and affect all countries: climate change, artificial intelligence, disinformation, growing geopolitical fragmentation, the repeated violations of international law, and attacks against the rules-based order. Portugal's conviction is clear. No country, large or small, can manage this alone. Effective and lasting solutions must be collective. The answer is, therefore, not less multilateralism, but better multilateralism. More effective, more inclusive, and more capable of delivering concrete results. We believe that the United Nations, despite its limitations and constraints, remains the most legitimate and universal framework for addressing global challenges. But defending multilateralism today also means recognizing the need for renewal. International institutions must evolve if they are to remain effective and relevant in a rapidly changing world. And that is why the Pact for the Future is so important. It represents the most comprehensive effort to strengthen international cooperation and adapt global governance to 21st century realities. Its significance lies not only in its commitments, but also in the recognition that today's challenges are interconnected and require integrated responses. Its successful implementation is essential. For Portugal, the Pact should serve as a compass for the future of international cooperation. This is particularly important at a moment when the United Nations is also pursuing reform through the UN80 initiative. We view these two processes as complementary and mutually reinforcing. If the UN80 initiative focuses on strengthening the effectiveness and efficiency of the organization, the Pact for the Future provides a strategic vision that should guide that transformation. In other words, while UN80 drives reform, the Pact sets the direction. Reform should not be a mere cross-cutting and budgetary exercise. Rather, it should strengthen the United Nations' ability to deliver. Likewise, the implementation of the Pact is also essential to advancing concrete reforms in global governance. If multilateralism is to remain legitimate and effective, it must become more representative of today's world. And this is particularly true for the Security Council. A more representative and inclusive Council would strengthen both the credibility and the effectiveness of the United Nations. All regions should have a meaningful voice in decisions concerning international peace and security. Also, partnerships between the UN and regional organizations are crucial to address contemporary challenges and promote peace, security, and development. And Portugal is committed to support all these priorities. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, the future of multilateralism will depend on our collective willingness to work together. The Pact for the Future offers an opportunity to renew trust in international cooperation and adapt our shared system of governance to a changing world. At a time of uncertainty, we must reaffirm a simple but yet powerful. Our challenges are shared, and so must be our responses. Portugal will continue to stand firmly on that path, convinced that effective multilateralism remains our best hope for building a more peaceful, a more just, and a more sustainable future for all. I thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for these wonderful welcoming remarks. I think it sets us on the right course. I now have the pleasure to introduce our opening plenary keynote address and accompanying panel, which will be moderated by our very wonderful co-host, Julia Seixas. As you are aware by now, if you weren't before, the theme of this annual meeting is multilateralism under challenge and the future of the Pact. Our panel today will think through the challenge part of the theme as we try to unpack what this means throughout the next few days together. This panel tackles the profound fracturing of the post-1945 international order, where military interventions, domestic polarization, and shifting economic realities have severely weakened the legitimacy of Western-led multilateralism. As emerging powers like China, India, Brazil demand a greater voice in global governance, the traditional rules-based system is giving way to a more plural, highly competitive, and fragmented landscape. This shift has replaced open globalization with strategic distrust, weaponized supply chains, and paralyzed institutions when global crises require collective action. Over the next hour, our panelists will explore this critical paradox: how nations can navigate a world where shared global challenges demand cooperation when the international environment is increasingly defined by national security concerns and competition. I am very pleased to have Dr. Adriana Ertal Abdenour set the stage for us for this conversation through her keynote address, which is titled "The Age of Impatient Multilateralism." Dr. Adriana Ertal Abdenour is co-president of the Global Fund for a New Economy and co-founder of the Brazilian think tank Plataforma CIPO. Adriana previously served as special advisor for international affairs in the office of President Lula. She has published widely and advised governments and international organizations on issues including UN reform, BRIC countries, the BRICS, climate governance, and South-South cooperation. She is member of the founding committee of the International Panel on Inequality. Adriana, you're welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, especially to the organizers and to the university for having me here. I'm blinded by ACUNS right now. Let me start by just saying that as you heard, I was in government until recently, and I've already run into 5 people here today on whose work I drew when I was part of President Lula's speech writing team, including on UN issues. So a big thank you to the collection of amazing minds that we have here in the room. And ACUNS has always been for me a space to really test new ideas, to try to think outside the box, precisely because it manages to gather scholars and practitioners. So it's a real treat to be here today. So first of all, a multipolar world is not in itself something to mourn. And this is something that many of us have actually been arguing and working for a while. For decades, we, at least in the developing world, were told that there was only one center to the order or the system, and that to be developed meant to converge towards that center. And multipolarity breaks that spell, right? And I think the break, for the most part, is productive, although there is a lot of short-term pain. What do I mean by that? When India builds a digital public payment system and moves more transaction than any card network on earth, and then offers the code to other countries, that is multipolarity. Capacity that is generated outside the old center and shared. When Brazil pushed under its G20 presidency for a Global Alliance Against Poverty and Hunger, which, by the way, unites not just developing countries, but also countries from the north, east and west, right, around a shared agenda. Or when it put taxing the ultra-rich on the agenda of finance minister who had spent generations arguing that this was impossible. That is multipolarity. When the African Union took its seat at the G20 table, when South Africa hosted an mRNA vaccine hub precisely because the market had refused to serve it during the COVID pandemic, these are not symptoms of disorder. Instead, they are they're a sign of a healthier distribution of capacity and new configurations and alignments. So let's be honest here. A lot of what gets called fragmentation, dangerous fragmentation from a Western capital often looks to us in Brasilia, in Pretoria, in Jakarta, like agency, like new forms of multilateralism arising from outside the center. Second point, and here's the turn, okay? Multipolarity becomes dangerous the moment it stops meaning distributed capacity and starts meaning built-in uncertainty, especially around spheres of influence. So multilateralism to me has always meant, when I was mostly a scholar, then when I was a negotiator for the Brazilian government, now as, I'm not sure what I am now, hopefully a useful dilettante. Multilateralism is a bet on the future, right? You accept a cost today, and multilateralism is costly, because you trust that the rules will hold tomorrow, and that therefore international cooperation will deliver its benefits. But when no one can predict which commitments will survive the next election or the next unilateral sanction or the next geopolitically driven tariff, everybody shortens their time horizon. You saw it, for instance, in the scramble of the pandemic. Rich countries pre-bought vaccines many times over, while the mechanisms that had been built for equity, especially COVAX, had to wait at the back of the line. So the system we had built since the Second World War failed to guarantee that a poor country's order would be honored, so the strong hedged and the weak paid, right? And that is uncertainty. That is uncertainty doing its work through broken promises, through inequitable access, and through dashed expectations. And so you cannot expect future multilateralism along those similar channels to work the same way once those expectations have been dashed, maybe brought down to reality. Now, spheres of influence are even worse because they are uncertainty made permanent. This is my second concern. And I want to be precise about why I think it's so damaging, not just distasteful, but damaging. A sphere of influence is a claim that a set of countries and a set of societies are not sovereign subjects, but instead merely assets on someone else's balance sheet. That is what a sphere of influence is. So look at different parts of the world. My own part of the world is undergoing renewed threats to sovereignty. Look at the Sahel across the Atlantic. As one external patron withdrew, others moved in with security contractors and mining concessions. And the people of the countries of that region find their choices narrowed down to which outside power should be allowed to extract from their territories. Look at the competing infrastructure banners, right? We've seen the Belt and Road on one side, Build Back Better on the other side, the Global Gateway at the door, where a bridge is never just a bridge, it's a lien on a country's geopolitical and geoeconomic alignment. And so the damage of spheres of influence is not that they abolish the very thing that multilateralism was supposed to extend to everybody, the right of a state and a society, no matter how small, to make an independent choice and to have its people's desires respected. So it converts the many centers of what could be a beneficial polarity back into a few masters. And that is regression we should fear, not multipolarity, but its capture. I'm going to finish, don't worry. We have to remember that spheres of influence are not necessarily the automatic default mode of a multipolar world order. The continuation of the G20, the expansion of the BRICS, the sort of punching above its weight of the V20, and even, shall I say it, the remnants of the UN system, which many of us are fighting very hard to keep alive and to rethink in the light of current challenges, they attest to a multipolar logic that is not anchored in zero-sum logic, and it's not anchored in territorial and resource grabbiness. I don't know if that word exists in English, but maybe it does now. Grabbiness, right, is the banner of the times. So third, and to finish, the deepest problem is neither of those. It's that our existing global governance is mismatched twice, right? So it's unfit to manage the risks that we face, and it's unfit to harness the capacities that already exist. So the mismatch on risk, right? The Security Council was built in 1945 and still runs on the mathematics of 1945. For all intents and purposes, a single veto has frozen, right, its capacity on Syria, on Gaza, on Ukraine, on Sudan, you name it. And still it has no major representation gaps. So a body we designed to manage the sharpest risks of a multipolar age, which still faces nuclear risks, is structurally incapable of acting precisely when the great powers disagree, and precisely when it is most needed. The creation of the Board of Peace, which was mentioned here, is not just a symptom, but is meant to accelerate the loss of legitimacy of the system. Right? And the gaps between purpose and capacity, between representation and legitimacy, keep widening even further. I wanted to finish with one argument, another one controversial, right? Because that's the purpose, I think, of a keynote. Okay, so the same institutions that are unfit to harness the new capacity, and again, I have to underscore this, the Global South is no longer just a claimant in the system, it is increasingly a supplier to the system of clean energy manufacturing, of climate solutions, of digital public goods, of peacekeepers, of mediators. And yet our institutions seem incapable of metabolizing this. Right? So you have IMF quota reform that still hasn't been really accomplished. We have the example of the Loss and Damage Fund, which is a genuine victory for the Global South, fought for 30 hard years, was when it was capitalized at a level that is a rounding error against damage inflicted by a single season of drought, of fire, of floods. And so we have countries that are ready to build, we have societies that want to engage constructively, and yet a governance architecture that can neither protect them from the storm nor plug into what they have to offer. That is the single biggest mismatch. Now, implementing the Pact for the Future is essential. It provides the continuity in constructive multilateralism that we need. But as intellectuals, as practitioners, we also need to think deeper, and we need to rethink the very logic of cooperation. What do we want the UN for? What are the values and the principles in the UN Charter that have stuck, and what is missing from that document? And I think the intellectual exercise that we do in spaces like ACUNS should really inform the very strategic choices that have to be made, because there is now a set of windows of opportunity arising. I am very optimistic that in my lifetime I will see a multilateralism that is more fit for purpose and more fit for capacity. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much, Adriana, for your intervention. So this panel titled Challenge to the International Order. We have heard, and in some cases, some people have been felt that international order built up after 1945 is changing a lot. We have heard and we know about institutions such as the United Nations, NATO, World Bank, IMF, the World Trade Organization, and so on, that used to base and is based on multilateralism foundations. Through these institutions, we have heard that ideas such as what we call liberal democracy, or free trade, or human rights, or multilateral diplomacy, collective security, and also climate change solutions, for example, have been discussed, and decisions have been taken, not at the speed that they need, not at the inclusiveness they deserve. But today, this framework is changing. We see lots of, we see different approaches based mostly, in some cases, in military interventions, financial crises, in many cases resulting from what is designed as the financial international architecture, domestic polarization, some of the things that Adriana already mentioned. So in this case, indeed, international institutions are struggling to respond effectively to major global problems, and authority and effectiveness of these institutions are increasingly questioned. We are seeing states often bypass multilateral mechanisms when they see them as a slow, biased, or ineffective. And this leads to more ad hoc coalitions and regional blocs and unilateral actions. So at this moment, the world faces a paradox, or maybe I can say that. Global problems require cooperation, global cooperation, but trust in global institutions is weakening. To explore and deepen some of these aspects, we now move to a panel. So I invite Adriana, please go to share, to take your seat. And also we have two other persons. We have Ikan Borzyskovsky, who is a professor of international relations at the University of Oxford and also an editor-in-chief of the ACUNS journal Global Governance. Please take your seat. And also Professor Ramaswamy Sudarshan, the founding dean of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. We had also the plan to have a Portuguese, Mónica Ferro, but due to health issues, she's not able to attend in person or virtually, so we will conduct the panel between us. Very good. Yes? Yeah, I have a different mic. Okay, so I will start by you, Hinken, okay? You have recently published a book on states leaving international organizations. What were some of the key insights on state exit from these organizations? And have you seen more states leaving it in the recent years? What's going on? What can we expect from this, under this international order?
Sure. Thank you, Julia. So we've heard a lot about challenges to international order, international organization, international institutions. The book is really about one of these aspects, about states walking away from international organizations. And so when I say leaving international organizations, really I'm thinking about the two main types, which are either voluntary withdrawal, so when we saw Britain leaving the European Union or Trump leaving the World Health Organization, UNESCO, and I'm talking about forced suspension. So when countries are kicked out of international organizations, usually because they're violating some international commitment or underlying treaty with their state actions. And so here, Russia was kicked out from the Council of Europe and the Baltic Sea states. Some African countries were kicked out for coup d'etats from the Economic Community of West African States, for example. Those are the kinds of things we looked at in the book. Now, I think the reason I'm here is because the main way in which these things are usually understood when you read media reports, think tanks, but even when you look into scholarship, is there's two common themes that come out of interpreting these things that are very much around challenges to international order. The first is that we should understand these states leaving international organizations as either the cause behind that being nationalism or populism or sort of a backlash against authoritative institutions. And the second theme that comes out of much writing is that these cases have really increased over time. So either we didn't used to see these things in history, or even if we have seen these things before, really we have seen sort of an increase or an exponential growth in recent years where we've seen many more of these cases than we used to. And so the insights that you pointed to in the book, so the things that we think we contribute in this book on state exit from international organizations, is both in correcting this misperception and then offering a different finding or explanation of these states leaving international organizations. So we collected a lot of data, essentially going back in history over 100 years, and trying to track exits from international organizations across all 190 countries in the world, all 530 formal governmental organizations. And what we find is that, one, exits have not increased over time. So if you're just counting the number of exits per year as an absolute number, it's actually slightly increased. But if you're putting it in the context of nowadays, we have so many more international organizations than we had in 1945. We have so many member states that have joined international organizations in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So if you're also putting it in the broader context of increasing membership over time, really we actually see a drop in states leaving international organizations. And we think the reason for this misperception about the increase, while empirically it is actually not the case, is that mostly when we talk about exits from IOs, we're drawing attention to states threatening to leave or announcing to leave, but not actually implementing the leaving. And so these tools of threatening or announcing, but then perhaps not actually doing it, so only about 10% of threats actually result in actual exits, are ways of negotiating institutional change along all of those dimensions that we've heard about. A different power distribution, perhaps in the Security Council, different deals in the organization, different financial contributions that states want to make, more leadership roles, in particular in international organizations. And so we don't see the increase. Secondly, while many recent and high-profile cases certainly revolve around nationalism and populism, we don't find this linked systematically when we look across history, across many international organizations and states, as a systematic driver. And rather what seems to be driving these things is these efforts at negotiation, to try to leverage the threat of leaving and taking all of your know-how and financial contributions and expertise with you in order to try to get better contributions. And then the last one I will note is that perhaps as a matter of optimism or silver lining along those, we should find more effective multilateralism and the system can survive, is that many of these cases of exit are actually temporary and not terminal. So when people talk about a backlash against international organizations, they oftentimes have in mind a permanent moving away from international organizations. What we instead show is that half the cases of voluntary withdrawal, states return to the same international organizations later on. In 80% of cases where states were kicked out from international organizations, they return later on to the same organizations. So there is room for negotiation and change and optimism in the revival of these institutions.
Thank you very much. It's a very, enlightening to understand this, this more complex and dynamic. Yeah. Ramaswamy, this is for you. Adriana refers some examples from what we now call the Global South. So you are dividing the world in North and South. I don't like it very much, but this is the mainstream language about it. And taking this language, how can the Global South move from being mainly represented in international discussions to have a real decision-making role in these processes? What changes do you think we should envisage to go in that direction?
Thank you very much. Firstly, I want to say obrigado. I actually worked in an office in Timor-Leste that was named Obrigado, and I want to express my gratitude to Portugal for helping a new country take shape. And I worked with the Justice Department. There was Claudio Ximenez, who was the head of the Court of Appeals in Timor-Leste. And it was an example of great cooperation from all the Lusophone countries, Brazil, Cape Verde, Mozambique, all coming together to help a country get on its feet after a scorched earth policy from which its people suffered. Now, that's a great example of what countries getting together could do. And one of the features of that experience is that I realized that the opposite of poverty is not wealth or prosperity, it is simply justice. And because there needn't be poverty in the world, given the resources. And so it's an example of what countries getting together, the Lusophone countries in the case of Timor-Leste, could accomplish. You can contrast that, I won't go into that, with what happened in Afghanistan. I'll leave it there. But I'd say that the Global South, firstly, cannot simply go on complaining about colonialism and blaming current-day problems to a colonial past. It's easy to do that, but I think the first obligation of these countries is that they are members of the United Nations, and they must respect the rules-based order, and they must be honorable in complying with their treaty body obligations. The first step, because you need to have moral credibility and legitimacy before you can claim a status of influencing decisions. Yes, it's true that the Global South countries have been, as it were, sitting on folding chairs at the back of international discussions. They're kind of there, they may say a few words, but haven't been able to actually influence any developments with respect to the institutions that were set up in 1945, beginning with the Security Council. But in order to lay claim to that, one aspect is to uphold the moral legitimacy of the UN Charter. It's no good simply going to the International Court of Justice when it suits you. You should respect the opinion of the International Court of Justice, most recently on climate change obligations, and demonstrate in national policies, whether it's in India or China or Brazil or any of the countries of the Global South, that they take these institutions seriously. That's first. Secondly, of course, the world has changed, and there is a lot that the Global South, as the keynote speaker pointed out, has contributed and has shared widely with other countries. That gives them a standing and a legitimacy to be taken more seriously than they were. The world has changed. You might well say that the West, one thinks of works in the past, like the decline, the fall of the Roman Empire. That will inevitably happen in history. And there is a moment now where countries of the Global South can say that they are on the rise, but they must, I would emphasize, use that clout or power that comes with economic advance to uphold the principles on which the world decided never again, we will not have the scourge of war. So I think, therefore, there's a lot of soul searching that must be done by the Global South, and they must get united. There's no point in each country trying to create its own sphere of influence and feel that it's made progress. It's got to be a collective understanding that colonialism in its old form may have gone, but there are new forms of colonialism, and the people in the Global South deserve to be protected from that. And therefore, I'd say, firstly, as the saying goes, before you say anything, physician, heal thyself.
Okay. Nice. Adriana, to close this first round, you suggest that today's challenge is not simply to reform multilateral institutions, but to rebuild the political basis for international cooperation. What would make a future international order to be more legitimate, not only for the governments, but for the citizens as well?
Thank you, Julia. That's an excellent question. And we're still operating very much on a system built on the Westphalian logic of the nation state, even though there are all kinds of factors that undermine the relevance. They don't do away with it, right? You have transnational corporations, but you also have within this kind of, I would call it right now, deeply asymmetric, almost perverse type of multipolarity, you have political imaginaries emerging that are even more harmful. So for instance, we see, not just in parts of the global north, but also in some parts of the global south, new political imaginaries of neo-civilizationism. And typically these are mobilized before domestic far-right audiences, but they also have repercussions within the international system insofar as they don't necessarily obey the rationale, flawed as it may be, of these units, right, of action and analysis, which is the nation state. And then you also have a historical participation by civil society in key spaces of multilateralism that is also endangered when we revert to these spheres of influence and zero-sum types of logic. And I know there are many people here in this room who have worked on, ideas about global constitution and federalism and how to enhance negotiations by inclusion of civil society. I think those are things that really enrich not just the intellectual debate, but also the practice of international affairs. But what concerns me there is that I don't see, it's not on my radar at least, a serious discussion and efforts to constitute a new basis for internationalism, right? And we have, if you look historically, even before World War II, you had worker solidarity movements that were transnational in scope. After World War II, you had deep shared emotion and objective of preventing another world war. What are the bases for internationalism at the level of people and at the level of communities? What's going to bind us together? Because nation states do their job, as Inca's work shows very well, that there's kind of a rational choice, almost a rational choice type of range of alternatives to be made in terms of the presence or non-presence or the threats of non-presence of the state. But the glue that binds together the system ultimately has to do with people and communities. And I don't know where the new basis is. It would be wonderful if new ideas emerged out of this ACUNS conference. I imagine things, for instance, like the way that the AI sector is being structured, right? If you look at the political economy of artificial intelligence, even globally, you have incredibly high market concentration that's very easily translated into political power that undermines our democratic processes, including our democracies. And I see, for instance, in the United States right now, a lot of opposition to data centers because they don't bring jobs, because they suck up your water and your energy. But you know where those data centers are going to end up, right? If that not in my backyard movement works in the US and is not present in the developing world. And so maybe, is a conjecture on my part, but maybe there's a way to mobilize workers who are concerned about this excessive concentration of market and power around AI together across countries. Maybe that would constitute, one such element. I think we have to be very creative and have very sensitive radars to pick up on what the new basis will be, because without that, I think it's a lot of empty words and realist thinking that doesn't translate into people's lives.
Okay, nice. I think we stop here from our side, and I don't know if it is possible to put some light in the auditorium, because I don't see you. We see a blur mass of people, but we can't see you. If it is possible to put some light in the auditorium, because at this moment I will invite the auditorium to put some questions. Also, for those who is following us in the Zoom, please put your questions in the Q&A function in the Zoom, because there is one person reading your questions. And at this time, I will pick some of the questions, if I can see your hands. Okay. There is mics handled in the auditorium. Okay, I see one hand over there. One hand over there. I don't see. And over there, I can see some hands, but I'm sorry if I will not respect the order. It's very... Okay, you have the power, so you have the mic. With you, you have the power to speak. Please say your name and organization.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the excellent panel as well. WPS Sidhu from New York University. Absolute delight to hear all of you. My specific question is to Dr. von Boreshkovsky on the departure of countries. Now, quantitatively, that may be correct, that it's actually either plateaued or remained, or declining even a little bit. But if you look at the countries which are withdrawing, that I think may also lead to that impression. So, yes, there is this wonderful myth about all countries being equal, but Great Britain's Brexit had a greater weight in that. So that's number one, the kind of countries which are withdrawing. But second, short of withdrawing, remaining within the organization, but kind of hollowing it out. And I think a really good example is the US and NATO. Without withdrawing, it can actually do a lot of damage by moving troops out. Or if you look at the development arena, the US is not likely to move out of the OECD or DAC, etc., but not funding adequately is basically, the same, even perhaps worse than withdrawing in a way. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Maybe this part of the audience now.
Somebody that's on the right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, over there. Speak up.
Is it not working, the mic?
Hello. Okay, so I have a question from the virtual attendees. So one person asked, in an increasingly polarized world, how can multilateral institutions like the United Nations remain effective when major powers disagree on critical global issues such as conflicts, climate change, and humanitarian crises?
Okay, maybe for Adriana, this question?
Sure.
You have to solve the world today. I will pick two more at this point.
Thank you. I don't think the mic is on. Are we on now? Okay. No, I don't think so. There we go. Okay.
Yes,
thank you. Thank you so much for an excellent panel. I'm Lise Howard, the former president of ACUNS, and I'm a professor at Georgetown University and chair of the faculty of the School of Foreign Service. Adriana, I have a question for you. I actually just need to thank our hosts first for what a fabulous opening ceremony. Thank you so much. It's really such a pleasure to be here. And I don't mind the heat either, Dr. Tombe. Okay, so I want to play the devil's advocate for a moment, thinking about multipolarity. We are moving toward a world where objectively there are two great powers. It's the US and China. So I think objectively we're living in a bipolar world. And at the same time, power is diffusing to different places around the world. And so there is an element of multipolarity moving. And we do have some states asserting their authority, their power in different ways. The example of mRNA in South Africa is an excellent one. My question is, you yourself said that there are some states that need protection from the storm. I'm thinking small island states, especially as climate change increases. Every state in the world is going to need to figure out the future of work as AI increases. Every state in the world will face threats, a variety of threats, especially from new technology, and I'm thinking especially drones. So there are bases around which all of us, no matter where we are in the world, have an interest in cooperating. And is it possible for the whole world to be cooperating at the same time? So is there some sense in thinking about different poles? And I don't want that to be the answer, but that is the question.
Thank you very much. A last one, that side. Can you please bring a mic over there? On the left? Yeah, on my left. Yeah, over here.
Stand up.
Thank you very much. My name is Daria Shilali. I work with UN University Center for Policy Research. I had a question that goes back to the title of the session, The Age of Impatient Multilateralism, which points out to multilateralism which should be focused on delivery. I think that multilateralism perhaps does not know what it wants to deliver, but it rather wants to deliver quickly and with as a few means to do so as possible. And you guessed it, I want to talk and wanted to make you talk a little bit about UN80. What would be the risks posed by such an initiative in the age of impatient multilateralism? Thank you.
So thank you very much for the questions. I will follow maybe the order. I think you are the first. You can.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. These are excellent questions. So your first question was, fine, you're telling me that withdrawals haven't increased over time, but that's saying or counting that every country is the same, and whether Kiribati leaves or the US leaves or UK leaves, probably there's a difference. You'll be delighted to hear that in Chapter 1, we actually look at different weighting factors. So we also look at weighting countries by GDP, by population, by military power, to see if once we take into account more important, by whatever standard you might think, that is the case. And so we have 3 different figures, graphics, splitting it out in the book chapter. We still don't see an increase in cases. Of course, we could be picking other measures, which perhaps there is then a trend. So for anyone who's interested, the data is on my website. Please feel free. That is like a public good for anyone who's interested in sort of contextualizing and situating a single case in the broader universe of cases, or checking whether we've done a good job or not. Please do feel free to go to the website, download the data, use it for your own purposes. And then also in the back of the book, there's an appendix that lists every single case that has occurred in history. Your second question, I think, is right on the dot. So this is what so you mentioned, maybe countries don't leave, but they can do all kinds of other things inside these organizations to hinder international cooperation. You talked about underfunding international organizations. You talked about blocking decisions and sort of throwing sand into the wheels, right? So these are things that I would call obstructionist behavior, or perhaps sabotage in very nefarious ways. This is, I would think, like the next frontier of international relations research. So on these kinds of issues, there are individual studies on international organizations and like case studies, but there's not a lot of consolidated work on this issue. Just in May, I co-convened with colleagues at Johns Hopkins University in Bologna and Hall a workshop on obstructionism in international organizations, and we convened 20 scholars to try to get a better comprehensive understanding of that. So I think that's where the field is going and where we need to learn more. I think your question is right. That could be even more destructive than leaving the international organization, because one of the things we show is that those that leave are usually preference outliers, are the grumpy ones, the spoilers. And so once you get rid of them, actually cooperation might ease in some situations. And so staying in and still hindering cooperation could actually be the worst outcome. But ultimately, that's an empirical question, which I would like to address again in a more general way than just looking at one or two individual cases. And so anyone who has examples and or great measurements of these things, please do approach me throughout the conference, because I'll try to convene and move this field forward. So thank you for your input.
Adriana.
Thank you. Those are two really big questions. So first of all, how to fix the UN in light of geopolitical rivalry, I think was the small question. Okay, so three things. First of all, we need to keep the engine running, right? There has to be a legitimate space, however flawed, where states and civil society actors come together to discuss not just the challenges, but the solutions. And keeping the engine running is really important right now, precisely because it's fraying not just at the edges, and there are some very perverse alternatives being put forth, like the Board of Peace. That's not enough, however, and so that's why I think reform in the more traditional science, including the Pact for the Future, is so important, because it means that there's a shared vision, but also a work plan, right, that addresses different components of the system. Now, even that is not enough. I think, obviously, we have to find shared ground. And here, Julia mentioned, and I sense this every time I come to Europe to take part in like think tank debates, a lot of discomfort when I speak about the Global South. Oh, the Global South is so heterogeneous, it doesn't really exist. It's a political construct, and so, we use it selectively, but here's why I think it does matter. And when I hear calls, okay, we need to be together and let's bridge the Global South and the Global North, yes, but there are there's deep structural inequities that remain in place. So, for instance, and I'll give you a couple of examples. The debt crisis. I know that there's a debt crisis in the rich countries. I get it, but the debt crisis in the developing world, especially in African countries, is so unbelievable. I mean, you have people who have rich pensioners in the global north profit from debt in the poorest countries in the world. How can you expect there to be a common discourse when one side is profiting, not just omitting, but actively profiting from debt? And you can find these examples all over the place. On climate, I was a climate negotiator in the COPs. And what was happening basically is that the Annex I countries were kind of shifting the burden, right? They were really pressing on us in the G77 to decarbonize at all costs. Forget about fighting poverty, forget about fighting hunger, you have to decrease your climate footprint. Oh, by the way, no means of implementation, no finance, no technology transfer. Oh, remember, we have an intellectual property regime. So this is why I mean by, yes, I deeply believe that we have to bridge the divide, but that's not going to happen authentically unless some of these major structural gaps can be overcome. And this means there has to be political willingness, not just in the global south, to come at it maybe with a less oppositional stance, and we do that in the BRICS because, hey, we have to have pressure mechanisms, but it also has to come from the global north. Right? We cannot have another G20 that says, oh, you're going to transform your economies with blended finance and carbon markets. When we know that public investment, that state-driven vision of transformation, public banks, all of that infrastructure is needed for economic sustainable development. On the other question, Lise, thank you always from you, the hardest and the most fascinating questions. So on bipolarity, okay, yes, there's no doubt that we are living through a deeply asymmetric, semi-multipolarity, I'll grant you that has other risks, right? So it's not just about rebuilding the unipolar moment or whatever you want to call that, and it's also not about quietly accepting a new bipolar division of the world. Now, having said that, I think that in the West, my understanding, right, and I lived in the United States, I taught there, I studied there, is that there is a default mode of manichaeistic thinking. Can I say that? Manichaeistic thinking. So in the United States in particular, this arises out of a definition of the free world, which is created not as a positive, but in opposition to what they do not want. And so it's everything, like everybody who's the axis of evil, the old one and the new one, is not the free world, and we are the free world. But when you look at what that actually means, right, and this, I know it's get mobilized very differently over time, for instance, within US foreign policy, but it's also adopted very eagerly, in my opinion, from what I understand by European foreign policy, is this tendency to think that the world naturally falls into two camps. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. And when I read the white papers coming out of China, for instance, at least on paper, I see a vision for a global governance that is not based on spheres of influence, and it's not even based on bipolarity. There's a lot that we can criticize about that, but I think we have to engage with whatever sources. And I'm talking about China, but I'm also talking about Barbados, who also has this fantastic view of reform, deep reform of the international financial architecture. So there are signs that good things can happen around regional spaces, for instance. And that's neither or, right? It doesn't have to exist in a bipolar configuration, a unipolar configuration. Africa is setting up the African financial system. They're just sick and tired of, right, Bretton Woods. It's not working, on the contrary. And I think, it remains to be seen how much of that African development finance system will get implemented. But I think we need to think creatively about the interstices of bipolarity, if that's what we face. And we need to think creatively about multilateralism in order to prevent that kind of set bipolar, I would say, manichaeistic thinking from taking root in the first place. Easier said than done. I know, Lise, but let's work towards it together.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I have here, I will pass the word to you. What do you think about the outcomes of the last year conference in Seville, Financing for Development? I think it is the title of the conference, promoted by the United Nations in Seville, in Spain. No, for you, because you are...
what I think of Seville?
Yes, what do you think about outcomes?
Beautiful document. When I read the outcome, I cannot believe this. Because I was in President Lula's office when we had the presidency of the G20, and the battle there, and we kept losing the progressives one within the government. We kept losing this battle of narratives, right? It's like, development will come when you unlock private capital and maybe some carbon credits too. That was sort of the narrative that was coming from the G7. And then there was another counter-narrative that said, and I mentioned it, well, those things are good, they're necessary, investments are good, but what you need is a long-term vision. Mariana Mazzucato would call it missions, and you need to mobilize domestically or otherwise within the region from your public institutions, from the public banks. You need to use things like government procurement, which were taboo not long ago. You need to plan your green industrial policy and your transformation. And so when I saw I didn't go to Seville. I heard it was very hot there too. Yeah. And when I read the outcome, I was like, wow, this is beautiful. This actually is a document that converges. However, what I perceive now is a lack of implementation, especially because, from what I understand, the G7, and I watched a little bit of the last summit, continues to cling to the old narrative that mobilization of private capital will solve climate and development together, right? So, beautiful document. We need to maintain that spirit alive, but we need to find at least little niches that can actually be implemented. That would be concrete examples of overcoming that barrier. Then I promise you, I'll stop talking about the Global South, but not before then.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ramaswamy, do you want to pick the last question?
Address the question of impatience and multilateralism. That it often means you make efficiency into a great value. And it means you forget about equity, you forget about other things, you focus on processes and procedures, and the end result is not so important. And so this often happens, that there is this ideology that the market is the answer to the world's problems, and therefore you must change public policies in different countries so that they kind of give more scope to the private sector. It's forgetting about the moral limits of markets. It's forgetting about values. It's forgetting about principles like equity. And it's forgetting some very fundamental lessons about why does the state exist? Why is there such an institution as the state? To devalue that and to somehow think that, I often say that Adam Smith's invisible hand is invisible because it doesn't exist. And therefore, it's important to not get drawn into all of these, the McKinseys, the Big Four consulting companies, and so on, and their great emphasis on the private sector efficiency and so forth, and to somehow recover some very fundamental principles as to why genuine freedom requires state action. I think, therefore, we need, and one of the things that the United Nations system has done, in contrast to the Bretton Woods institutions, is exactly that, promoting some ideas. For instance, the Human Development Report, started in 1990 by Mahbub al-Haq and Amartya Sen, is a genuine contribution to the world of ideas. It is to say that it's no good to simply focus on the economy and how well is the economy doing. You have to be concerned about how well people are doing. And if you change that, you then get a lot of positive outcomes. But then consulting people, formulating policies, I often say that the missing element in public policy is the public, because there's always an urgency. There's a budget. There's a fiscal year. You have to get money rolled out in that time. It takes too much time to talk to people. It takes too much time to consult people. Moreover, there's an attitude that it's a cult of the expertise. The expertise knows all, and ordinary people are fodder for their ideas. So we need a revolution in these ways of formulating public policies, a global public policy, the creation of global public goods. These are the things that we need to focus on. And if we don't do that and simply say, oh, we need to know what is the bang for the buck, I'm afraid we'll lose our way.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid you have to stop here, so time is inexorable. So thank you very much for this very nice conversation. I ask you a big applause for our panelists. And thank you for your questions as well. So we have to move to our seats. No. Wait a moment. This is very complex. Lots of details. Okay.
And for all of these interesting questions and areas of tensions that you've put on the table for us. It is difficult to transition, but I think I just hear a guitar string play, so this is a good segue to bring back Rector Ferreira's foreshadowing moment from earlier today. ACUNS typically, for those who are joining us for the first time, ACUNS typically hosts a cultural moment. It's an opportunity to to do something that helps give us the sustenance we need to engage on some of these difficult questions. And so a moment of exploring the culture of the host country is something that is valuable to ACUNS, and I'm glad that some of you will be experiencing this with us for the first time here, and for those who are returning, that you get to experience that with us today. I briefly would like to introduce Pedro Hoya, who is one of the most esteemed Portuguese guitarists and composers of recent decades. He's widely recognized for his singular ability to blend tradition and innovation, establishing an identity rooted in Portuguese music, but that is open also to the world. Since 2010, Pedro has been a member of the iconic Portuguese band called Resistência. He maintains an active international touring schedule with recent concerts in Australia, China, India, Pakistan, South Korea, the US, Uruguay, Brazil, and Singapore. To show you just how much in for a treat we are, I would like to read a couple of quotes about Pedro Hoya's music. So Pedro Hoya is, according to Público, which is a Portuguese newspaper, Pedro Hoya is a unique case in the Portuguese music universe, a guitarist of simple means touched by the gift of virtuosity. And then Antenna One says, and this is, I'll exit right after I say this, because there's nothing else to say after that. These are guitar phrases that don't need words to speak.
first of all, let me just introduce this gentleman who is, to me, the greatest Portuguese guitar player, José Manuel Neto. So we are playing some, at the beginning, we are playing, of this little concert, we are playing some fados with a contemporary view, of course, because we are both soloists and we don't sing. But we try to express in our two instruments the spirit of fado. So the next one, it will be a little up-tempo beat fado, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. So now we are enough of Fado. We love Fado, but we play other languages, musical languages. So the next tune, it's a version that we made over a tune of one of our greatest popular songwriters. His name was José Afonso, and this tune is called Cantigas do Maio. Thank you. Thank you very much. This tune, it's a composition of mine, and it's called Icarus. So I love that character, Icarus. He tried to reach the sun, but unfortunately. Well, it's time to finish our little concert. So I would like to present again my dear friend, great musician, José Manuel Neto. My name is Pedro Joia, thank you. And we are finishing this concert with another tune of this great composer of Portuguese popular music, José Afonso. This one is called A Morte Saiu à Rua. So, thanks a lot. See you next time. Thank you.
May I invite you to take a seat for a few more minutes? I apologize that we're keeping you from reception, but we have a few more items we'll run through very quickly, and then we'll conclude for the day. Thank you to Pedro and Jose Manuel. As I invite you to reception, so I'm not inviting you quite yet, but as I invite you to reception, I would like to note that our reception is generously sponsored by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and by SOGRAPE. I want to highlight SOGRAPE more specifically because SOGRAPE is providing port wine, which we'll have during reception. For those who are not familiar with port wine, it's apparently a big deal. I've never had it, but it is it is apparently something to be had. So SOGRAPE is Portugal's leading wine company with an unparalleled presence. It features top brands and exceptional vineyards in Portugal's main wine-growing regions. We'll have a video from SOGRAPE, and then we'll finish a few more items, and then it's reception time. All right.